There is a photograph. It sits in a private collection in Edinburgh. It is small, no larger than a prayer card. An album in print, mounted on stiff cardboard, dated 1872. It shows a woman seated in a high-backed chair. She is young, perhaps 26, perhaps 28. Her dress is dark. Bombazine, most likely. The fabric of mourning. Her hands rest in her lap. Her expression is composed. At first glance, there is nothing remarkable about this image. It is one of thousands from the period. A woman sitting for a portrait in a photographer's studio. The backdrop is painted. A garden scene. Columns draped in ivy. But look closer. Look at her throat. There is a mark. A thin, dark line running horizontally across the skin, just above the collarbone. It could be a shadow. It could be a flaw in the emulsion. But it is neither. Because on the reverse of the photograph, in faded brown ink, someone has written a single sentence. Taken 11 days before the wound appeared. The woman in the photograph is Eliza Redmond. And this is the story of the woman who dreamed her own murder. 1872. To understand what happened to Eliza Redmond, you must first understand the world she lived in. England in 1872 was a place of contradictions, of progress and rot, of gaslight and sewage, of empire and anxiety. The Franco-Prussian War had ended only the year before, and the tremors of continental instability had crossed the Channel. There was a feeling, among the educated classes, that the old certainties were dissolving. In the cities, the air was thick with coal smoke and the sweet, cloying stench of horse dung. In the hospitals, the smell was worse. Carbolic acid, if you were fortunate. Gangrene, if you were not. Joseph Lister had published his work on antiseptic surgery only 5 years earlier, and most physicians still regarded his methods with suspicion. The germ theory of disease was not yet widely accepted. Surgeons operated in street clothes. They sharpened their scalpels on the soles of their boots. Death was intimate. It happened at home, in the parlor, in the bedroom. Bodies were washed by family members. Children saw corpses before they saw the sea. And photography was changing everything. The wet collodion process had made portraits affordable for the middle classes. For the first time in human history, ordinary people could see their own faces frozen in silver and light. But the camera did something else, something no one had anticipated. It created evidence. A photograph was not a painting. It was not an interpretation. It was, or so people believed, a mechanical record of truth. And in 1872, in the small Gloucestershire town of Nailsworth, a photographer named Edwin Cottle would produce an image that defied every rational explanation his century could offer. An image of a wound that had not yet been inflicted, on a woman who had already dreamed it. Eliza Redmond was born Eliza Hargrove in 1844 in the village of Woodchester, 3 miles south of Stroud. Her father, Thomas Hargrove, was a cloth mill foreman. Her mother, Anne, took in mending. They were respectable, church-going, unremarkable. Eliza was the second of 5 children. She attended the parish school until the age of 12, then entered domestic service at Selsley House, the home of a wool merchant named Josiah Pemberton. She was, by all accounts, quiet, diligent, particular about small things. She arranged the linen cupboard with a precision that unsettled the other servants. She could not sleep if a drawer was left open. She counted the silver every evening, not because she was asked to, but because the act of counting calmed her. In 1866, at the age of 22, she married William Redmond, a clerk at the Stroud branch of the Gloucestershire Banking Company. William was 10 years her senior, a lean, methodical man who kept a daily weather journal and never raised his voice. They settled in a narrow terraced house on Spring Hill in Nailsworth. They had no children. The reason was never recorded, and in that era, it was not discussed. Eliza kept the house meticulously. She was known in the neighborhood for her garden, roses, lavender, a border of white foxglove that she tended with an almost devotional care. She attended St. George's Church every Sunday. She volunteered at the parish clothing bank. She was, in every observable way, an ordinary woman of the lower middle class. But there was one detail, one small, particular detail that her husband mentioned to Dr. Alistair Fenwick in the spring of 1872. Eliza had always talked in her sleep, not murmuring, not fragments, full sentences, detailed descriptions, delivered in a voice that William said was not quite her own. He had grown accustomed to it over 6 years of marriage. He found it mildly unsettling, but not alarming. Until the night of March the 14th, 1872. William Redmond was awakened at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning by the sound of his wife screaming. Not the scream of a nightmare. He had heard those before. This was different. This was a scream of physical pain. He lit the bedside candle and found Eliza sitting upright, her eyes open but unfocused, her hands clutching her throat. She was speaking rapidly. The words were clear, but the syntax was strange, inverted, as though she were narrating events in reverse. William later told Dr. Fenwick that she said, and I quote from the doctor's case notes, which were meticulously documented in his personal journal, "The blade is withdrawn, the blood returns, the hand releases. The man steps backward through the door closes. I am whole again." Then she stopped. Her eyes closed. She lay back down. Her breathing slowed. She was asleep. William did not wake her. He sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the silence. The next morning, Eliza remembered nothing. She prepared breakfast. She swept the front step. She was, in every respect, herself. But William was disturbed, and so he called upon Dr. Alistair Fenwick. Fenwick was the town's senior physician, a graduate of the University of Edinburgh, a man of science, not superstition. He had served as an assistant surgeon in the Crimea and had seen what the mind could do under extreme duress. He examined Eliza on March the 16th. He found her to be in good health, pulse steady at 72 beats per minute, pupils reactive. No sign of hysteria, which in that era was the diagnostic catch-all for any female complaint that defied easy explanation. He noted one thing. On Eliza's throat, just above the collarbone, there was a faint redness. A line, approximately 4 inches long, running horizontally across the skin. It was not a cut. It was not a bruise. It resembled, in Fenwick's words, a mild erythema, as though the skin had been subjected to sustained pressure, yet no external cause could be identified. He prescribed a tincture of valerian and advised William to keep a written record of any further nocturnal episodes. William did exactly that, and what he recorded over the following weeks would become one of the most unsettling documents in the history of Victorian case medicine. The episodes continued. Every 3 to 4 nights, without pattern or predictability, Eliza would sit upright in bed and begin to speak. Always at approximately 2 o'clock in the morning. Always with her eyes open. Always in that same flat, detached voice that William insisted was not her own. And always she described the same event. A man entering a room, a blade, a wound to the throat, blood, and then death. Her own death. But the details accumulated. With each episode, she added new information, new sensory particulars that no sleeping mind should have been able to generate with such forensic precision. On March the 21st, she described the smell of the room. Tallow and turpentine, she said, and beneath it, the smell of river mud. On March the 26th, she described the man's hands. The left thumbnail is black, A bruise beneath the nail, 3 days old. The cuticles are torn. On April the 2nd, she described the sound the blade made as it was drawn across her throat. She used a word that William had to look up. Crepitant. It means crackling. It is a medical term, used to describe the sound of air escaping through damaged tissue. Eliza Redmond had no medical training. She had never, to anyone's knowledge, encountered that word. Dr. Fenwick was now visiting the Redmond house twice weekly. He brought with him a colleague, Dr. Samuel Orme, a specialist in diseases of the nervous system from the Bristol Royal Infirmary. Orme conducted a series of tests. He measured Eliza's pulse during the episodes. It did not elevate. It remained at a steady 68 to 72 beats per minute. This was, in Orme's professional opinion, inexplicable. A person describing their own violent death should exhibit tachycardia. Eliza's heart rate suggested she was describing the weather. Orme also tested her pupillary response during the episodes using a candle held at various distances. Her pupils did not contract. They remained fully dilated, fixed, as though she were in total darkness, despite the candle flame being held 6 inches from her face. He documented this in a sworn affidavit, dated April the 8th, 1872, which was later filed with the Gloucestershire County Coroner. The affidavit states, and I quote, "The patient appears to occupy a state of consciousness for which current neurological science has no adequate terminology. She is neither asleep nor awake. She is neither in a trance nor in a state of somnambulistic automatism. She appears to be perceiving events that are not occurring in the room, yet she describes them with a specificity and clinical accuracy that would challenge a trained anatomist." On April the 14th, exactly 1 month after the first episode, Eliza added a final detail. "A date," she said in that flat, uninflected voice. "It is the 25th of April, a Thursday. The clock has just struck 1. William checked the calendar. The 25th of April, 1872, was indeed a Thursday. They had 11 days. Dr. Fenwick made a decision. If this phenomenon was going to culminate on a specific date, then it must be observed, measured, and recorded by every means available. He contacted Edwin Cottle, the photographer in Nailsworth, and arranged for a series of portraits to be taken of Eliza over the remaining days. The purpose was clinical documentation. Fenwick wanted a visual record of the mark on Eliza's throat, which had been growing darker and more defined with each passing week. By April the 20th, the mark was no longer a faint redness. It was a distinct line, raised slightly above the surrounding skin, the color of a fresh bruise. It resembled, with disturbing precision, the wound that Eliza had been describing in her sleep. A wound that had not been inflicted. A wound that didn't yet exist. Cottle photographed Eliza on April the 14th. That is the photograph I described at the beginning of this account, the one with the line visible on her throat, the one dated 11 days before. On the evening of April the 24th, the night before the date Eliza had named, Fenwick and Orme installed themselves in the Redmond parlor. William sat with them. A constable from the Nailsworth parish, Sergeant George Hale, was posted at the front door. Another constable watched the rear of the house. The windows were locked. The curtains were drawn. A fire burned in the grate. At 11 o'clock, Eliza retired to bed. Fenwick accompanied her upstairs and conducted a final examination. Her pulse was 70 beats per minute. The mark on her throat was now almost black. He noted that the surrounding skin was cold to the touch, significantly colder than the rest of her body. He measured the differential using the back of his hand and estimated it at 6 to 8 degrees Fahrenheit. He left the bedroom door open. He returned to the parlor. The 4 men waited. At 12 minutes past 1 in the morning, on April the 25th, 1872, Eliza Redmond screamed. All 4 men ran up the stairs. They found her on the floor beside the bed. She was conscious. Her eyes were open and focused. She was not in a trance. Her hands were at her throat, and between her fingers, blood was flowing. A wound, a clean horizontal incision, approximately 4 inches long, had opened across her throat in the exact location of the mark. There was no weapon in the room. There was no weapon on her person. Her fingernails were trimmed short, as Fenwick had noted during his examination hours earlier. The window was locked from the inside. The door had been open and in full view of the staircase the entire night. Dr. Orm applied pressure to the wound. It was not deep. It had not reached the carotid artery, but it was bleeding freely, and it was, in every anatomical respect, consistent with a wound inflicted by a sharp, thin blade drawn from left to right. Eliza spoke only once. She looked at Dr. Fenwick and said, "He was here, but he has not been born yet." Then she lost consciousness. Eliza Redmond survived the wound. Dr. Orm sutured it with silk thread. It healed within 3 weeks, leaving a thin white scar that she would carry for the rest of her life. But the aftermath was, in many ways, more disturbing than the event itself. Dr. Fenwick compiled a full case report, 47 pages. He submitted it to the British Medical Journal in June of 1872. It was rejected without review. The editor, Ernest Hart, wrote a single line in response: "We do not publish fiction." Fenwick then submitted the report to the Society for Psychical Research, but that organization would not be founded for another 10 years. He had nowhere to send it. He deposited the manuscript, along with Orm's sworn affidavit, William Redmond's nightly journal, and 3 of Cottle's photographs, in a sealed envelope at the Stroud Solicitor's office of Whitmore, Phelps, and Gould. The envelope was marked, "Not to be opened before 1900. It was opened in 1901 by a junior clerk named Arthur Phelps, the grandson of the original partner. He read the contents. He told no one. He placed the documents in the firm's archive room in the basement of their offices on King Street. In 1941, during the Baedeker Blitz, a stray incendiary bomb struck the building. The archive room was destroyed. The original documents were lost. What survives are partial transcriptions made by Arthur Phelps in a private notebook, which was discovered in 2003 by a local historian named Margaret Calder during an estate clearance in Stroud. Eliza Redmond herself lived until 1909. She was 65 years old. She never spoke publicly about the events of April 1872. William died in 1893. They remained childless. The house on Spring Hill was demolished in 1926 to make way for a motor garage. Edwin Cottle's photography studio burned down in 1884. The cause was never determined. Dr. Fenwick emigrated to New Zealand in 1875. He practiced medicine in Christchurch until his death in 1891. His personal papers have never been located. Dr. Orm returned to Bristol and never mentioned the case again. In his later writings on nervous disorders, there is a single oblique reference. In a footnote on page 214 of his 1880 textbook, Afflictions of the Cerebral Apparatus, he writes, "There remain cases which the physician must record, but cannot explain, and which he would do well not to remember too vividly before sleep." In 2019, Dr. Helena Voss of the University of Leiden published a paper in the journal Consciousness and Cognition, titled Retrocausal Somatic Manifestation, a theoretical framework for pre-traumatic tissue response. In it, she proposes that under certain poorly understood neurological conditions, the body may respond to events that have not yet occurred, as though time, at the cellular level, is not strictly linear. She cites no specific historical cases, but in her acknowledgments, she thanks Margaret Calder of Stroud for, quote, "an extraordinary notebook. The paper has not been replicated. It has not been refuted. It sits in the literature like a splinter, uncomfortable and impossible to ignore. And so the question remains, if the body can remember the past, is it possible, however briefly, however impossibly, that it can also remember the future? And if it can, what does that tell us about the nature of the wound? Was Eliza Redmond injured by a man who had not yet been born? Or was she injured by her own knowledge of what was coming? Some questions do not have answers. They have only weight. If this story unsettled you, subscribe to Forgotten Dread Tales and leave a comment below. Tell me, have you ever dreamed something that left a mark?